Good afternoon, everyone. Continue eating. I'm just going to do some PSA type things. My name is Chris Burnett. I'm the board president for Kansas City Jazz Alive, who produces these Vivid Vision panel discussions. We're in for a treat today. We've got our moderator, Steve Kraske, and 3 artist educators on the Kansas City jazz scene. Angela Ward needs no introduction. Matt Baldwin and Rod Fleeman are going to join Steve here in a few minutes. How many people know what Kansas City Jazz Alive does? Excellent. Catalyst organization. kcjazzalive.org. On your phone, you can go there and you can read about us and have something to talk to each other about. Without any further ado, Steve, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, panelists and Steve Kraske, let's give them a hand, everyone. The wonders of technology allow us to stream this to our Facebook page, and then it is archived there. We have some colleagues who could not be here today, Friday, noontime, and they're going to be catching the stream online. Hey, there's Mr. Benny Lee with it on his phone. He's got it there. And we've got Christian back here. He's in charge of the stream. Thank you. So without further ado, Steve, you got it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our, we're going to dissect the Chiefs' chances on Sunday. What they have to do against the 49er defense.
Yes.
We're going to go into great depth with that here today. Oh, seriously, this is session 2, to put this all in context, of a 3-part series on the business of jazz artistry that Chris and others have put together. We talked about live performances in our first session a few weeks ago. Today, as Chris said, we're going to focus on private teaching and how artists supplement their incomes through teaching sessions, adjunct teaching gigs, artist residencies, and the like. At our next session in a few weeks, are we still going in March, or are we going to move the date? March? Yeah. We're going to focus on royalty rates and a whole different aspect of the business of jazz. How much or how little downloading and streaming net professional musicians these days. And I'm prepared. I hope that isn't too much of a downcast.
Yeah, right.
So let's go to private teaching here. Again, as Chris said, a great panel. Rod Fleeman has played guitar with Marilyn May, Carn Allison, Jay McShann, Claude Williams. I feel like I'm introducing, like, Miles Davis was a great trumpet player. Well, of course he was. You know, Rod Fleeman, everyone knows him. More importantly for this conversation, he's taught jazz guitar at Missouri Western College, UMKC, KCK Community College, and KU,
UMKC, yeah.
Okay. Matt Baldwin is a saxophonist, teacher, and composer known for blending his early gospel influences with jazz tradition. He teaches at Metropolitan Community College, Penn Valley, and the Jazz Museum. And for the purposes of this conversation, he teaches private lessons as well. And finally, Angela Ward plays the keys. She's a composer and producer. She graduated from Florida A&M with a degree not in music, but in computer information systems. She got her minor in music performance. She performs often around town with her husband, James Ward. A lot of us know James, and her son, Jalen. She describes their home as more of a conservatory and production space than a conventional home. She has a personal mission of teaching young people who can't afford music lessons. And with that, give our panel a big round of applause. Tell us, when did you begin first teaching private music students professionally? When did that start for you?
Well, I was 15, and I got my first job teaching. My first guitar lessons were at the Tune Shop in Prairie Village, and things were a little rocky at first, but by the time I got into high school, I got into the jazz band, and that's when I started to really apply myself towards that. And then by the time I was 15, I got a job teaching privately at the Tune Shop, my first job. And my mom would drive me to work. And I don't know if I had any business doing it, but I did it anyway.
Why did you do it? Why do you do it today?
Well, I've always been, music, not just fascination with music, but the fascination of teaching it and explaining it. And so I've always had that love for that, and sharing it with other people. I've always felt a calling to do that.
You know, as someone who's a teacher myself, I know that just because you can play it doesn't mean you can teach it.
Well, that's true.
Why do you think you know how to teach it?
Because I needed all the theory I could get. So, you know, there are musicians, I mean, actually in jazz, some of my favorite jazz musicians couldn't read music. You know, you ask, well, what is Wes Montgomery, you know, Irving Berlin have in common, you know, some others, Stan Getz,
Sure.
you know, that they all played by ear. Even Irving Berlin had to have a musical secretary following him around all day to write down what he was playing, and but it was all in his head. And so, but for me, I think, and a majority of people, we need the help, the theory behind it, to understand it, to sometimes open up our ears to the possibilities.
Yeah. Angela, tell us about your mission of teaching young people who can't afford music lessons.
Well, that came about.
You're okay. Should I move the mics up closer?
Yeah, you might want to come up.
Yeah.
I actually got bit by the. Should I have to hold that?
Why don't you sing a little bit too?
La 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 la. Okay, there we go. Oh, there's a little snag there. Can you tell which one I'm on? Or it's still, that's it.
Very good.
No, not really. Wow. There we go. All right. Well, I actually got bit by the teaching bug, and I would say 2008. I started teaching with Lisa Henry with the Thelonious Monk Institute at Paseo Academy.
She's performing tonight down at the Folly.
Yeah,
right.
I heard about that. Yeah. So I started there working with the rhythm section. She invited me to be a clinician there. And as I worked there, I saw how passionate the kids were to learn. And they would not otherwise have the opportunity to learn to play or learn rhythm or it was piano, bass, and drums that I worked with, and they did not understand anything about jazz. And I would say that just to see their faces light up when as I taught, and that is what inspired me. That was my first time actually being in a classroom and teaching. Now, after that, of course, I was inspired and had other teaching opportunities, and I came across the neighborhood of Ivanhoe, and we did a residency there, and the youth that participated were low to middle income, and they were so inspired to learn music, and they otherwise, they weren't able to afford to pay for those lessons, but the fact that we had that residency there and were able to encourage them and give them that platform to express themselves and create it was just awesome.
Who sponsored that residency?
The Missouri Arts Council.
Oh, what a neat idea.
Yeah.
Is that still going on?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we started that in 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we continued it. We actually, a couple of weeks ago, we opened the registration up again to the community, and within an hour, we had 35 kids registered.
Wow. Which says so much, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really amazing. Matt Baldwin, how about you? When did you begin to teach private lessons, and why do you do it?
Yeah, I started teaching while I was studying music at UMKC, and at first I was just driving to people's homes, and it was a way for me to learn a lot about saxophone too by teaching, because the more you try to explain the same concepts in different ways, the deeper you get into those concepts. But it's teaching
I
lessons.
can totally relate to that, by the way.
Yeah.
I teach journalism. I totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I found that teaching is a direct way to share my love and knowledge of music with others. After I graduated, I started teaching at Penn Valley too. And it's been great to have an experience teaching people of all ages, retired students, beginners, really young ones, high school students. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Rod, these days, how common is it for professional players here in town to have a side gig teaching privately?
Well, I think it's very common, especially when I was coming up. A lot of the horn players would teach. They'd be teaching at a store like the Tune Shop, as I mentioned earlier, to augment their income. Because, if you were lucky enough to be a bass player, a piano player, a drummer, you might get a 6-night-a-week gig and be playing, for a living, for most of the time playing live music. But for a lot of musicians, it was like, you taught during the day and then you pick up your gigs as they come.
Because I assume at some point you realized that multiple revenue streams was going to become important.
Precisely. And I think now it's a growing thing now is that people can do online lessons. And so now the old days, you would take lessons with the local people, but now you can study with anybody, anywhere in the world. You can get online and do that. It's really remarkable.
Do you teach online at all?
Not really. I'm kind of a dinosaur.
Well,
but yeah, mostly what I do is just in person. Yeah.
Angela, do you teach online at all?
I do.
Grab that, yeah.
I only when
Or
necessary.
you and I can sit here and talk and you can let them go.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Of course, during the pandemic, I started teaching online. I didn't like the idea of doing that, but when I don't as much anymore. But when the weather is bad, I'll offer it to my students.
Do you have a sense too that most professional players in town, Angela, also teach on the side? Is that, you agree with Rod on that front?
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's real important.
Yeah. Matt, when did you realize that the multiple revenue streams was going to become something important for you? Is that just go hand in hand with becoming a professional jazz player?
Yeah, while I was studying music, I had several teachers who I think helped set my expectation for what it could look like to be a professional musician and sort of all of the different options and possibilities out there. And I would say as I started to play gigs here in Kansas City and meet other musicians and talk to them, I realized there were so many different combinations and ratios of music-related work that musicians were doing.
Hey, how do you organize your business?
Well, so and from a financial standpoint, I charge monthly tuition for weekly lessons, which kind of makes teaching lessons the most stable income for me, compared to gigging, where it fluctuates from month to month. And I play a lot of weddings, but not a lot of people are getting married in February. Many more weddings in September, but the lessons are very stable.
So maybe it's as important as anything you do from a financial standpoint.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rod, how do you organize things?
Oh boy, that's a question.
Well,
I don't teach a great deal, privately. I've taught at, Kansas City, Kansas Community College and different schools. So it's not as much of an issue for me to charge by the month, because I do, it's a little more random. Like I have a person that comes into town periodically on business, and he'll set up a lesson. We'll set up a lesson together. And so for me, I've been primarily, my career's mainly been based around playing and augmented by teaching. But I love both, I love both.
what do you prefer to do, private lessons or teaching like at a community college?
Well, the community college is the same thing. It's just private lessons. That's what I get hired to do.
You go in there and teach privately?
I just do private.
Yeah. Angela, how do you organize what you do?
Pretty much exactly what Matt said. The private lessons is like one of the main streams of income, and then performing on the side, and that's pretty much what I've been doing for a while. And keep in mind, when I first started, I was still in the engineering field, so it wasn't something that I was even thinking about I would never be doing full time. But I really enjoy teaching and performing a whole lot more than engineering.
I was going to say, how did you wind up where you wound up? Because you're doing right brain and left brain stuff, and that's making me nervous because
Amen.
most of us only do half of that.
Amen.
So, yeah, how did you get to where you got?
Okay, it's a long story.
Well, okay, we got time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, okay, let's see how I can shorten it. I would say, I've been playing professional since I was 12. So music has always been my passion. I was raised in an industrial, by parents that were raised in the industrial age. So they were like, music will never be your profession. So I wasn't the rebellious daughter. I was more so like, okay, I'll do whatever you say. So I went into engineering, and I don't regret it, but my passion was always music. And, you have the right brain and left brain. You have to really manage that, because when you're in a field that your heart is really not in, you're going to always be on that left side of the brain trying to master and learn and keep up. So that was pretty much my life for a long time. Then once I mastered the programming language, I was able to hop over here on the right side of the brain and start writing music and leaving the job at work. There was a time when work came home, but once I was able to leave it there, the 5 to midnight was all music. So that's the way I managed it when I first started doing that. So the economy is the way it is. I went through several layoffs, so on that last layoff, I'd say, okay, we're just going to see if we could make the right side of the brain income match the left side of the brain income. So I worked.
Did you get there?
I did.
Really?
Yeah.
How?
It took.
Yeah.
Okay, so, gosh, I would, on the first, or I don't know which layoff, I've spent 8 hours a day booking gigs. I said, okay, if I could spend 8 hours at work, I could spend 8 hours working for the JWB and for myself and for our school. So I spent 8 hours a day, get up just like you would go to a 9-to-5 job, and prepare for the day, get your coffee, get going, and work for yourself for 8 hours. And you plant the seeds, they will come up.
That's interesting. Is there anybody else in this room who's right brain and left brain? I have a feeling the answer is no. Is there anybody? Are you doing both? There you go. We have somebody. Yeah, one person out there. The whole point of this discussion today, Angela, is the business of jazz artistry. And I'm wondering, does your volunteer work in some way wind up contributing to your bottom line? Is there a lesson in what you do for other jazz artists somehow?
I would say it does contribute to the bottom line, because I did kind of like start doing this as volunteer work. And then when I learned that you could actually apply for grants and be a part of the Missouri Arts Council and all of these different organizations out here, those things actually pay, and they're there to assist us musicians and artists who want to do this for a living.
How did you get connected with the Missouri group?
I was interested when Lisa invited me to teach. I just question after question. How are you doing this? What is this? What is that? Just question after question after question.
Yeah.
And so she taught me and introduced me to the Missouri Arts Council, the program specialist there at the time, but she's retired now. But Julie Hale, and then I learned how to write grants and learn the process.
Matt, have you connected with the Missouri Arts Council? Is that something that you've done? Rod, either one of you? Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually benefited from Angela's work with Show and Shed, which is a yearly sort of educational program for students where they spend one day, it's a very focused day, learning a ton about improvisation and jazz, and then do a performance at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So,
Rod, how about you with the Missouri Arts Council?
I haven't been associated with that, but I still do. I've done quite a bit of going back to high school. I had two experiences, and that was going to jazz camp. And one of them was back then they called it the National Stage Band Camp, and that was my first experience doing something like that and hearing professional musicians play every night. And then went to the Stan Kenton Camp also during that high school period. And then I did a lot of jazz camps through Jim Widener, who's no longer with us, but did a lot of camps. I think I'm just down to one camp now in Esterville, Iowa, way up there.
Really?
Up by Lake Okoboji. But I love that. I love the opportunity to work with young people for a week and that concentrated thing of, kind of, I kind of call myself a first generation Jamie Abersol baby, because my first jazz camp, my improv teacher was Jamie Abersol, and he'd just come out with his first album, playing jazz, beginning to improvise, Volume 1. We went out to his car, and he got it out of his trunk.
that's crazy.
And that's how I started to learn to improvise, was in the bedroom, rather than going to a club and getting my teeth kicked in. I was, okay, this is a Dorian mode, okay, play through it, and that's what really, so jazz education was very important to me from the very beginning.
Right. Well, let's bear down a little bit more on the private lessons. And I'm wondering, Matt, let me come to you here. Do you have policies for attendance and cancellation? Tell me about how you manage that.
Sure. I don't really have a rigid policy for attendance and cancellation. It's more of, how can we be reasonable about making up lessons, especially if someone gives me advance notice. If the week before a student says, I'm not going to be able to do a lesson next week, is there an alternate time? I try to accommodate that. But if it's a last minute cancellation, then I usually won't do a makeup for that.
And you'll still charge them.
Yeah.
You work off a syllabus? What do you?
So I don't have a one syllabus for all, sort of like I would in a classroom setting. Instead, I have more broad, overarching categories that I try to incorporate into lessons with each student. So things like working on tone and technique and ear training, improvisation, those sorts of things.
What age levels are you willing to work with?
Any age. I'm working mostly with high school students right now, and I like working with high schoolers because they've spent time learning their instruments already, but maybe now they're interested in learning how to improvise or kind of taking things to the next level, and that's fun.
Do you work out of your house? You work at a music store?
Yeah, I teach some lessons from home. And then I also teach out of the Culture House in Olathe. So I have a lot of students there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of a music and arts program. They have dance classes, theater, and art, and music lessons.
Angela, do you do some private lessons in which you get paid for?
Yes, I teach out of my home.
Out of your home?
And over at Ivanhoe Neighborhood Center.
How do you handle the whole cancellation, no-show thing?
Well, there are no makeups. I mean, with a schedule of a musician, there's like the time frame is the time frame, and most of the time the other days are filled up with gigs. So normally if they miss out, they just missed out.
The door slams shut.
It is, unfortunately.
And what age levels do you want to teach?
I do 6 on up. Yeah.
Six on up?
Yeah, I don't go any lower than age 6.
How do you, can 6-year-old, tell me about working with 6-year-olds.
Well, if they can read from left to right, they're ready. Yeah.
Oh, Greg's not, you're saying that too, Greg? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some parents say, "Oh, my child is exceptional," and they can,
That's what parents always say.
So I had to.
And a lot of times they're wrong, but that's just me. That's just my opinion. Yeah.
So I had to do the left to right thing, because I had one parent, they were looking for. This was at the time that I taught from the school where I was teaching, and they were lost. And I had to step outside into the parking lot to, kind of flag them down. And when they pulled up, there's a toddler in the car seat. I'm like, is that the student? I'm like, so that's why I had to go from left to right. Yeah, really. I'm sorry.
How did that go? Keep going with this story. Yeah.
It's not good. It was not. No.
But that child was exceptional, though, right? We know that now, right? Yeah.
I'm done.
Do you use a syllabus in what you do, or what are you working off of when you organize these things?
You may be familiar with the Bastion series of Thompson and Alfred.
Only vaguely.
Yeah. So those of you that taken piano, I use those three book series, and then it depends on the student. I first do an assessment, first couple of lessons, and then see what method to use with them.
Yeah. Rod, how about you? How do you deal with the no-show thing?
Well, like I say,
You're
it's a little bit more random with
Yeah.
me, other than, of course, in school, you have students that are supposed to be there, and sometimes they're not, and so you just try to lay down the rules, like we have to be here or have a good reason, and sometimes that happens too. In Kansas City, Kansas, the kids, they have jobs, they have to do a job, they have to work, and so you have to understand that too. But my template has always been that, when I studied here in town, the teacher I had was John Elliott, and he was a legendary pianist and educator, and taught Pat Metheny, who's Gerald Spates and Danny Embry. We all studied with John, and so that's always been my go-to.
If someone is interested in going into teaching, what advice would you offer them? Private teaching.
What advice? Well, consider the student, where they are, what level they are, and I think I can speak from experience. My studying with John, I was in high school. I'd gone to a couple of jazz camps, so I thought I knew a lot, and John started everybody in the same place. Like, here's the key circle, sharps and flats, scale proofs, and I'm thinking, I've come for a steak dinner and I'm getting pablum. And so that started this process. And John warned me the first day. He said, this is the foundation of the house. If you don't have this, doesn't matter what happens later on. And I just went sliding down the hill to the point where my last day, I was getting ready to go to school at University of Utah. And John was just like, all right. Just like, so I went to University of Utah, and my first day in jazz theory, I'm thinking, okay, get this behind me, move on. And my first lesson at Utah, the teacher was talking about tetrachords. And I love tetrachords, but I'm going, we should be talking about scales. We should be talking about the key circle. And so that's when I thought, if I'm going to learn anything this year, I've got to go back over that John Elliott stuff and really apply myself to that. And that's what I call my bachelor degree. It's getting that under my belt, coming back to Kansas City, but hadn't really applied it. And then I was home less than 2 weeks when somebody said, hey, you want to go hear this organ player? Greg Myers is playing. He's got this great guitar player, Rob Whitsitt. And so I went to hear him, and I couldn't get in the club. It was a private club, and I wasn't 21. And I told the bouncer that I didn't have my ID. Well, I can't let you in. So I was going to turn around and leave, and the guy I came in with said, well, they're playing their break song. I'll bring Rob back to meet you. I'm going, okay, And Rob comes back and offers me the gig, where he says, I can't guarantee anything, but this is my last night. And if you'll talked to Greg, and Greg said, well, I hired a bass player to fill out the group, but if you'll play the weekend for free, that'll give you a chance to hear. And so that was my master's, because now I had to, I missed the memo that, you have to know a lot of songs. I was used to reading. So my first night, I'm looking in the organ bench for some music. And it's like, well, no, we just play. I'm going, I'll be cool on Satin Doll. Girl from Ipanema, the bridge is going to be tricky, And, but that opened up the door for me, because I was having to play 4 hours a night, 11 p.m.s when we started till 3 a.m., 6 nights a week. But in that time period, I was putting all that John Elliott, thinking the numbers, being able to transpose, and that all came together. And then when my redemption came in, John Elliott came in one night. He had just gotten done playing at the Playboy Club, and a lot of musicians would come in because the Missouri clubs closed at 1. And John comes in, and he comes up to me, and he kind of smiles. I didn't know he could smile. And he said, you sound good. Like he could. I said, well, I really worked hard on your stuff when I got to Utah. I finally worked hard on your stuff. And I said, would you, and he always had a waiting list. He had, to get with John, you had to sometimes wait for a year to have an opening. And I said, would you take me back? And he said, yes. Put me right back. And it's a totally different story from that point on.
Wow. It's a great story. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Matt, what advice would you give to anybody who's thinking about going into private teaching?
I would say just start, because you learn from the experience. For me, part of what was helpful, and this was advice that I received from other people, was to offer to do clinics at high schools or schools in the area. And that way,
a great idea. You
can kind of assist band directors with whatever they need help with, and then also do a sectional with students on your instrument, and that can lead to lessons and relationships with schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Angela?
I would just tell the person thinking about it that each student learns differently, and take a different approach to each student.
Yeah.
You can't use the exact same curriculum cookie cutter.
I want to talk about that just for a moment, because in exchanging emails with Chris, he made such an interesting point, I thought, about this work. Chris points out that successful private music instructors combine these seemingly contradictory qualities. They're patient yet demanding, impassioned and articulate, and able to simultaneously nurture their students and push them to do the hard work required to advance as an instrumentalist and then blossom as a musician. Matt, do you buy that description? If so, how are you both patient and yet demanding?
Yeah, I do buy that description. It's always kind of a balance, right? Because with every student, there may be several things going on in their lives. So you need to be attuned to that, and to know, okay, music is important, but it's not the only thing they're doing right now. And not every student is trying to become a professional musician, so objectives and goals for each student are going to be very different as well. But then personality types too. Some students may already be really hard on themselves, and those types of students just need extra encouragement. Whereas another student who isn't putting forth a lot of effort needs a little extra challenging, and so it's just kind of thinking about that balance and being aware of it all the time.
How do you go about kicking somebody in the behind?
Oh, it's hard for me personally, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But
I was going to say, you seem like such a nice guy.
I try to just have an honest conversation about, okay, look, why is it that we haven't practiced the last 3 weeks? And try to figure out, okay, what do we need to do? How can we make some practical steps towards dedicating a portion of the day towards getting something done?
It also sounds to me like you really sit down with any student when you first begin. Maybe the first thing you do is don't have them play the horn as much as you do talk to them.
Yes, definitely.
Why are you here? What are we trying to achieve here?
Exactly. then we can be on the same page and go from there.
Yeah. So Angela, this idea of, being patient yet demanding, how do you navigate all that?
Well, I've learned that, so I give a recital twice a year. So in May and in December, I've learned that for those students that won't practice, that when they get on stage and embarrass themselves, unfortunately, they find out and understand why I'm asking them to practice their song 3 times a day before, and, they kind of learn the hard way, unfortunately.
So this is a magical way to instill motivation.
Yeah.
The Angela Ward method here. You all getting this down? Yeah, that's pretty.
Unfortunately, yeah. But
It works.
It works because the recital was in December. It's been a while since we had recitals because of the pandemic. And then those kids, they came back in January ready and practicing between every lesson, and you see a difference. So and they see the others getting trophies and being promoted, and they're still on the same page for 3 weeks, So all of that, that's what I've learned that works for my students. And then I have the piano students and those that are there for their moms and dads. And then you have the students that want to be musicians, and those are the ones that we encourage to come to Show and Shed, and that are actually performing at the farmers market and around town. You don't have to really tell them too much.
So we just heard the Angela Ward method for motivation. What's the Rod Fleeman method with your college students, Rod?
Boy, that's a
Put you on
hard
the spot,
one.
didn't I?
Yeah, because at Kansas City, Kansas, I had 2 students that were really, really on, and they were doing really well, and I didn't have to do anything to motivate them because they were just so motivated, But your patience gets tried because you get every level. You might have somebody that's just beginning to play the guitar, and it's just. I don't know how to answer that. I really don't. It's just it's case by case basis.
Are you good at being patient?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But I always think back. So when I started playing, I almost quit. I mean, that first year, I had a rental guitar, and the strings were, big thick neck, and they didn't want to spend any money on a guitar because who knows if I'm going to stay with it, right? So I was fighting this beast of an instrument, and then it was hard. When you're playing guitar, you're not in an ensemble, like a piano player. You're sort of like an island, And so thank God my mom, she played accordion, but she hadn't gotten it out in a long time. But she pulled the accordion out, and away we went on Red River Valley. But she helped me, she pump out the chords, and it kind of kept me going. And then I got my first guitar that Christmas, a Gibson acoustic, and it was like, oh, this is heaven. I survived.
I always find in my teaching that if a kid is putting in the effort, God, you want to give them the world. But those kids, and I'm meeting with one at 2:00 today in my office in 202 Hague Hall, if you want to stop by. Those kids who don't try that hard, you just, that's sort of when my string gets pulled, and I'm not going to put in the effort. If you're not engaging here, then why do you want me to do it?
Like I say, I feel like I was one of those. I went through that experience, like I mentioned before about John Elliott. So, it was a painful lesson. When I realized that I had failed that first time around, but sometimes you don't know. I mean, that failure can actually lead to a rebound, and I feel like I had that experience.
The other thing that struck me about my experience in thinking about this session today is when I went from the Star, or still at the Star, then UMKC hires me to teach. And not only did they not start me until like the 4th week of classes, the kids were wandering around looking for the classroom, they didn't hire me until 4 weeks into the semester, and the whole thing was a mess. But I mean, no one ever sat me down and said, Steve-O, here you want to teach, here's a textbook, and we have something called a syllabus, the plural of which is syllabi, and I just went from being in a classroom to trying to understand, here's what a quote is, and here's how you get quotes, and here's how you frame questions to get people to talk. No one taught me I just started doing it. Did you just start doing it? I mean, but there's no school to go learn how to teach here, is there? Well, I mean, there's that, but I mean, you guys didn't go to school to become private teachers, or did you?
You're correct. But for me, I did not go to school to learn to teach. So
and you're just doing it all of a sudden.
Yeah.
How did you learn how to do it all of a sudden? Is where I'm going.
It was very scary.
It was very scary.
I really didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I was, first of all, honored to even be asked to come work with kids in a rhythm section, just because, someone thinks that just because you know how to work with a rhythm section, you can teach it. But it was a learning experience. I mean, once you get in there and you see what the kids are doing, you let them perform for you first, and then you see where the corrections need to be made. And that's kind of the approach I took, because I didn't know what I was doing. All I had was, the Jamie Ingersoll books, and I also had J.B. Dias. I had J.B. Dias from the Monk Institute. I had his material. So, so I just took that. And
well, I just heard the snickers out here, so I'm gonna come back a little bit. University, you teach in high school, you have to go to college. You have to go to college to learn how to teach. You teach at college, maybe you learn how to teach, and a lot of people never learned how to teach. They just got a PhD in something, Doris, at K-State University, and you just show up and you're teaching, right? And it's kind of, you pay lots of money to do the college thing, but with people who maybe learned how to teach and maybe they didn't learn how to teach. Matt, where did you learn how to teach?
So I also didn't get an education degree, but I was sort of thrown into it. But when I started teaching, I was thinking back about some of my own teachers and trying to just
emulate what little bit you remember.
Exactly. Yep. So that was helpful for me, just observing other educators, and then sometimes just talking with colleagues too, and throwing ideas back and forth. I mean, I've learned a lot of things from other colleagues and their ways of doing things. I mean, even right now, got a good technique for, schedule some recitals to motivate kids to practice good ideas.
Yeah. Rod, how about you? What'd you learn?
I completely agree with Matt that, doing these jazz camps, I'll sometimes sit in and watch another teacher. And maybe it's something I teach, but it's another angle. It's another way of looking at it. And it'll turn a light bulb on for me to go, I'm going to use that. I'm going to incorporate that, because it's, we all have our thing, right? And then we have our way of understanding it, but getting another perspective is just really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
How quickly can you spot talent?
Just like that. Yeah, you could tell. I mean, it's when it comes along, it's just, there's no doubt. There's no doubt.
That's really fun. It's a great moment when you see it.
Yeah, you go, wow, where's this going to go? And you don't know. You don't know, where it could go. There was a bass player here in town. Anybody remember Nathan Berg? He was the son of Chuck Berg, who was a great writer, wrote for Downbeat, and Nathan was,
I know Chuck Berg's name,
a phenom. He was playing bass, acoustic bass, at the age of 13 or 14, and sounded like Ray Brown. And he went to North Texas, famous jazz school, and became the bass player in the number 1 o'clock band at the age of 15. And then he was on the road with Maynard Ferguson. Yeah, and And I played a few gigs with him when he was growing up, and his career path is completely different now. It's not music, he's, teaching in a university economics or something that he just, the music business just turned him off so much, that he just didn't, we know the music business, right? There's a lot of tough, there's stuff to deal with. And he couldn't deal with that. But you're talking about a talent. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
And you were around for Pat Metheny's rise too.
Yes, I was. Yes, that was a dark day the first time I heard him.
Seriously,
whoa, I thought I was doing pretty good.
Seriously, was it?
Yeah, he was 15 years old. He was playing at a club. I had to go with a friend who was older, because I was young. I was 16, and he was leading a trio, and no music on stage. They're just playing, and it sounded like he was 40 years old, been playing all his life, and it did. It was something else. I just went, I really thought I was doing good, and then after that, it was like you couldn't run into somebody on the street without hearing about Pat. It was like he was the talk of the town, and deservedly so. He was just amazing, yeah. And it was like, when I first heard him play, it was just very mature, not a lot of chops, but just very. Just like he was playing like a seasoned pro, and then a year later he had all the chops, and it was like watching a rocket take off. Wow. I'm still watching that rocket.
Yeah. Matt, do you agree with that notion you can spot talent pretty quick?
Yeah. I think
Have you been around it? Have you seen it?
Yeah, I was going to say on the flip side, thinking back to some of my students who I started teaching in middle school, and then I taught them through high school, and they graduated, went to college. It's important not to discount students who you might make an initial judgment towards, because I've had some students really surprise me and take off, and I didn't see it anywhere. I didn't spot it,
Right.
But so that's kind of been an interesting thing to observe too.
Angela, you agree with all that?
Yeah. Yeah, we can pretty much spot talent right away. One of our early residencies, back when my son Jalen was 8, we had a group of young people, Jalen Ward on drums, Ernest Melton on saxophone, Daniel Ross was also a keyboardist and clarinet and drummer, BJ Lindley on piano, and this group of kids got together, and my oldest son was on bass. They formed a group called 9 and Under, and they were going around town performing, and they were amazing. So yeah,
Wow.
they kind of took off and surpassed us. So yeah, we were pretty fortunate to have such a talented group of young people. We took them to perform at Convoy of Hope at an outdoor festival, and people were coming from everywhere when to hear them. And they, as they got closer to the stage, I kept hearing, "Those are kids," because they thought they were grown people playing.
Give me my money back.
Wait, what our money back? Exactly.
Well, I'll take questions from the audience right after this last question, or nearly the last question. But what do you do with a student who's paying you all good money, and he or she just doesn't have it month after month? It's just not coming. What do you do? Well, someone's got to answer.
No,
It happens, doesn't it?
I
Doesn't
can't
happen?
do
Come
it.
on.
I'll tell the kid, your parents paying good money for you to be here. You should, practice. I can understand if they're not paying, or if they're enrolled in our free programming or something like that, I would never say anything like that. But for those students that are paying, their parents are paying,
Yeah.
I can't. I'll tell the parent, I don't think your child is really interested in even though that child may not be interested, I try to encourage them to continue with the lessons, and I have mixed emotions about it, but I do alert the student first and then talk to the parent.
Well, I imagine sometimes they're trying, but even then, it's not there.
Yeah. And
Which might have described my career on the trumpet back in the day. Yeah. Tried so hard. Herb Albert, here I come. I never got that. Yeah.
Well, I've had only like a couple of times. Sometimes you're just stuck. Like you're teaching in college, you've got a student, and I swear I had one that the clock would actually slow down. Only 5 minutes have gone by? It's a half-hour lesson. How can time is slowing? But what do you do? I mean, what do you do? Just
I've had talk show guests sort of like that. Yeah, was this ever going to end? Yeah.
tick, 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 tick.
Matt, you're nodding your head.
Yeah. I've had students where a student's been up front, like, I'm not interested in saxophone. I don't listen to saxophone. I'm like, what are we doing here? But they're just taking lessons so that they can be in a particular band at school or a certain chair. And so then we try to come up with a game plan. Okay, how can we utilize this time in some productive way? But it is a challenge. And then I have had students too, where maybe they weren't really interested in saxophone or whatever other instrument, but they are interested in a different instrument. So sometimes just making a shift to another instrument
Like
can
guitar.
be the solution.
Yeah.
And then that intrinsic motivation will be there. So
Tick, 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 tick. Yeah. Go.
One of our viewers on Facebook asked this question.
Sure.
She says, how do we make playing instruments accessible to all socioeconomic groups?
How do we make playing instruments accessible to all socioeconomic groups? It's a great question. Angela? Yeah.
Well, that was totally the purpose of our program that we just started a couple of weeks ago, is to make that music lessons accessible. And we immediately, once we put the ad out there, not only did we get the registrations, but we also got like a ton of instrument donations. We got like over 20 guitars, acoustic guitars donated, and a bass, and 5 keyboards, and we're still picking up keyboards.
That's great.
And a couple of violins.
Amazing. Any other thoughts about all this, Matt?
I think just working with parents and figuring out something that will work, whether that's reducing a rate or doing different frequency of lessons or teaching for free, just being flexible with that.
Yeah.
And, I'm sorry, and for that person on Facebook, I can send you the link to register if anyone is interested.
Great idea. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Rod, you mentioned earlier that some favorite musician, they even don't know how to read the music.
Right.
So can everybody can be trained without reading the music sheet?
Oh, that's a great question. Let me answer that. I think that, yes, you can train your ear. Now, these gifted individuals like that just have that innate, and I don't say it's just having a good ear. It's not just having a good ear. It's when you have that good ear, then you have something like photographic memory. When you put that together, it's just a powerful thing. Gary Burton, in an interview recently with Rick Beato, said that he noticed when he, for a while he was a sideman for Stan Getz. And Getz was one of those ear guys. And Getz, Gary Burton would always say he'd wait to hear the chord before he would play. There'd be a little hesitation, and you could throw anything at him, but if he heard it, he knew what to do. But for me, as a mere mortal, the combination of theory and ear training, you can get better. I'm proof of that, because I didn't have that silver spoon in my ear, and so the training and the ear training, transcribing, whether it's taking solo off or just playing along, or going to a gig 6 nights a week and having to play 4 hours of music you don't know, that you just have to train your ears to start to hear the changes. And so, but to get to that magic level, that's just there. That's just, I don't know if you saw the movie about Elton John. It's a great scene where he went to the Royal Academy of Music to study piano. And so he goes into the room, and the piano teacher doing the auditions, she's playing a beautiful classical piece. And then she finally notices he's there. So she stops abruptly and says, well, you're here for the audition. Where's your music? I don't have any music. Well, play something for me. So he starts to play what she just played. Now, get a load of this. He stops all of a sudden in the middle of it. And she says, why did you stop? Because that's where you stopped. Photographic memory and ear, powerful.
Yeah. Wow. Any other thoughts on?
They had a question.
Yeah, Chris?
I have one question, and it goes along with what you teach in the lessons, particularly for an instrument, whatever instrument you're playing. There's a lot of students that come to me, they want to learn an instrument, but they don't know that there are different elements they have to learn about music. They don't know that there are competencies they have to build. How do you guys go about presenting that, breaking down your things that you're going to teach to them and assessing where they're at, and then assigning over a course? How do you go about explaining to a new client, that's what they are, what they can expect of lessons? Angie, Matt, Rod, either one of you.
I guess sometimes just starting by listening to some music together and going through some of the different aspects of the music, starting from there, okay, let's focus on the melody, let's focus on the rhythm and keeping time. I do a lot of singing with students too. And sometimes I've had students where maybe initially they have a hard time matching pitch, but then years later, they're singing lines and they're hearing things in the music, and it's definitely possible to grow in all of those things that aren't necessarily instrument specific.
Did you have a teacher sing to you when you were young?
Yeah. I think I've had several teachers do that. Mm-hmm. Growing up too, my family, we all sang songs together. We harmonized, sort of a part of our family thing too. Yeah,
very good. Rod?
And I think there are like what you're talking about is there's universal aspects. There's the instrument, the idiosyncrasies of the instrument, but then there's just the basics that I hate to bring up John Elliott, but he didn't play guitar. He played piano. But he taught anybody who plays saxophone, you took lessons with John Elliott, just because you were learning all those building blocks, learning how to spell, know how to play in any key, turn everything into numbers. Like if I'm in the key of C, C is now 1, D is now 2, right? And that's not an easy thing to think about, to an alphabet that's moving, starting in different places and the numbers changing, and then you start to get into the more complicated things of jazz, altered scales and right. So but those are things that are universal, and so I've always used that as the thing to overcome the instrument. Like guitar, my problem initially was I was used to patterns. Like I'd learn a pattern on the guitar, and I'm just terms of fingerings, 2 4 1 2 4 1 3 4 1 3 4 2 4 1 2, like memorizing a phone number, and then you just take that up the neck like a capo and go 2 4 2 1 2 4 1 3 4, and you don't really think about the notes you're playing. So I got sucker punched by the guitar because I thought I knew more than I did because I could play it, but could I say it?
Right.
No, I could play it, but I couldn't say it. So those are the things I look at is how can I apply that universally, like, that it would apply to any instrument.
Cool, thank you both.
New York Times just had a story yesterday, day before, 5 minutes that'll make you fall in love with John Coltrane, different people reflecting on their favorite songs of Coltrane. It was just several I hadn't heard before. It was just terrific. So anyone else? Yeah.
This is a really right field, left field, far out of the ballpark kind of question, but I'm so curious about it. So in Eastern music, there are semitones, right? So I'm wondering, have you ever run into a student or someone who has grown up with that semitone kind of thing in their ear and then encountered Western music?
No, but I've played some in Turkey, and I would hear the music in Turkey, and I know what you're talking about. Just to get a little theoretical, between C and D, in Western music we have one note in between, which could be called C sharp or D flat. But in Eastern music, there's like 8 tones because you have semitones. So you C, you're just slightly sharp. What kills me in that music and that culture is they hear that stuff. They hear it and they play it on a oud, an instrument with no frets. That blows my mind. But in a sense, that happens in jazz and blues, right? Because you're singing the notes that are in the crack, and it's not what we would call in tune, but it's a note that's there. And I see a relationship between that. But to bring up your question, no, I've never had anybody that was taking lessons that came from that particular background.
Gentleman way in the back.
This is sort of a follow-up for Steve's question about students that have a problem learning. Now, it's kind of a two-part question. What happens when you have someone that's trying really, really hard, but they're not getting it? And if you have someone who's trying hard, but they're not getting support at home. See, I was in that category. Mm-hmm. And what do you do, or what do you tell the parent or tell the student? How do you handle that?
Well, I think that in a sense, what's missing at home, you become that missing element. You become that support system. And that like I consider my band director at Southwest High School being like almost like a father-like figure. Sitting me down like, you're in the stage band. You can't be messing around doing what you're doing. You can't represent the school and still be going out at night and doing, stupid kid stuff, right? And so that was a lesson about responsibility. I kind of needed that, My parents were divorced, so I didn't have that male figure to kind of land on me.
Yeah. Anybody else want to hop in on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. We have to be the example for that child that's not getting that support at home.
It might be the shining light that they need.
Exactly. Yeah. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, because I never got any support at home.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard for me to work because they didn't want me doing it in the first place, but I went on and did it anyway. And I was only mediocre at best because of that. Plus, the other stuff you have to do, work, the other school work, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
Like that. And when you're not getting support at home,
It's very hard. It's very hard. Yeah.
Well, I got the support and I was still mediocre. So, yeah. Anybody else? Well, I guess, yeah.
Do you all happen to have any youth jazz programs on the Kansas City, Kansas side? Yeah.
Chris Burnett.
Youthjazz.us.
And there's Kansas City, Kansas Community College it's a tremendous program. It's what they're doing over there. John Stafford, Justin Bennick, Brett Jackson. It's a tremendous program. It really is.
The summer camp? Is that
Well, they have a summer camp, but also just the school in general. The program they have is just top notch.
Well, I saved one final question for the end, and I think everyone here will appreciate it. The score Sunday will be. Angela, come on, give it up. Where are we going here Sunday? With Debo Samuel, we got Christian McCaffrey, we got Travis. Where's this going?
21-7, Casey.
21-7, Kansas City.
Infinity to 0, Chiefs.
20.
Infinity.
Chiefs 28, 49ers 21.
And with that, we have concluded our panel. Let's give them a great round of applause for being here today. Matt, Angela, Rod, this is just great. Thank you so much.
How about a hand for Steve Kraske? Yes. And also, Emily, Daryl, Emily, will you stand up, please? 2 board members of Kansas City Jazz Alive helped make this happen. Emily Bierman, Daryl McKeag. I'm Chris Burnett. I'm the president of Jazz Alive. We have a founding member of our board, Greg Carroll. Will you stand up? He founded Jazz Alive, 13 years ago? 14 years ago? 13 years ago? But thank you all. Thank you very much.